I was standing at the pharmacy counter when the silence turned humiliating. Not the quiet kind, the kind where people stop pretending not to listen. The bell above the door had just rung. Someone behind me sighed. The pharmacist stopped typing, leaned closer to the screen, then looked up at me differently. Not confused, not apologetic, just careful. He said my name out loud, slowly, like it needed permission to exist. Then he said something that made the floor feel unstable beneath my feet. My heart medication had been stopped, canceled, not delayed, not out of stock, stopped. I laughed at first, a dry, embarrassed laugh. I told him there must be a mistake. I had been taking those pills for years, every single morning. Same white box, same bitter taste, same promise that my heart would make it through another day. He didn't laugh back. He turned the screen slightly so I could see it. A red notice, a recent update, a digital signature that wasn't mine. My ears started ringing. The chatter behind me faded. All I could hear was the blood moving too fast inside my chest, a chest that now felt unprotected. I asked who made the change. He hesitated. Then he said it. My daughter's name. It landed harder than any diagnosis I'd ever received. I felt heat rush to my face. 73 years old, and suddenly I couldn't breathe properly in a room full of strangers. I gripped the counter, pretending my hands were steady, pretending I was still in control. My phone vibrated in my pocket. One missed call. From her. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. I walked out without the medicine. The sun outside felt too bright, almost mocking. Cars passed, life continued, and I stood there realizing something terrifying. My body was no longer the only thing failing me. Someone I trusted had decided I didn't need my medication anymore, or worse, that I shouldn't have it. As I sat on the bench outside the pharmacy, my heart pounding without protection, one question burned louder than the fear itself. When did my own daughter decide she had the right to control whether I lived comfortably or suffered quietly? And why did it feel like this wasn't about my health at all? I wasn't always this fragile man gripping a pharmacy counter. Once, my hands were strong enough to carry her on my shoulders through crowded streets. I remember the weight of her small body, the way her fingers dug into my hair when she laughed. I remember promising her, without words, that I would always be there, that nothing would ever touch her. I kept that promise. When her mother left, I didn't explain it to her the way adults explain things. I just stayed. I learned how to braid hair badly. I learned which school events mattered and which smiles were fake. I learned how to hide my exhaustion behind routine. Every decision I made bent in her direction. The illness came later, quietly. First as breathlessness, then pills, then rules. No salt, no stress, no forgetting. Doctors talked to me like I was a list of instructions instead of a person, but she was there, sitting close, nodding, listening. She became my reassurance. She offered to manage my appointments, to keep track of prescriptions, to handle insurance calls I no longer had the energy to fight through. It felt natural, logical, loving. I told myself this was what family did. At night, she would remind me to take my medicine. Sometimes she would sit with me until I swallowed, like I once sat beside her when she was sick as a child. I felt grateful, safe, proud even. I thought I had raised someone dependable. But care has a way of changing shape when power slips into it unnoticed. She started asking for access. My medical files, my phone alerts, my emails from the clinic. In case something happens, she said. I gave her everything without hesitation. After all, what could she possibly do with it that I wouldn't want? There were moments, small, almost invisible, when something felt off. She began answering questions meant for me at appointments. She spoke over me, gently but firmly. The doctors didn't seem to mind. In fact, they seemed relieved. I told myself I was lucky to have a daughter who cared this much. Trust makes you ignore warning signs. When I asked about a prescription refill once, she said it was already handled. When I mentioned a side effect, she brushed it off as age. When I tried to read a letter from the clinic, she told me not to worry. It's just routine. I believed her because believing her was easier than facing the alternative. The truth is, I was afraid of becoming a burden, afraid of being seen as weak, afraid that questioning her care would make me look ungrateful. So I stayed quiet. I let her manage my health the way I once managed her childhood. I didn't notice when my role shifted from father to responsibility. I didn't notice when concern turned into authority. Looking back now, the signs were there. The way she insisted on being present for every conversation. The way she grew impatient when I asked too many questions. The way she smiled when others praised her for taking care of me. I thought that smile meant love. I didn't realize it was control slowly tightening, and that my trust was the very thing making it possible. And the more I depended on her, the less room I had left to doubt her. I didn't confront her that day. I went home without my medication, carrying a paper bag that felt lighter than it should have, because it was empty. Each step up the stairs felt heavier than the last. My chest wasn't hurting yet, but fear has its own weight, and it presses down in a different way. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my phone. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation, a misunderstanding, a safety precaution I didn't fully understand. I told myself that children don't deliberately put their parents at risk, that daughters don't cross that line. But the missed call was still there. I didn't return it. Instead, I called my doctor's office. The receptionist sounded rushed, distracted, like someone who had repeated the same sentences all day. I gave my name, my date of birth. I asked about the sudden stop on my prescription. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to make my stomach tighten. She said the request came through their system 2 days earlier, an update to my treatment plan. Approved and documented. Everything done properly. I asked who approved it. She told me the authorization came from my listed caregiver. I had never used that word for my daughter before. The receptionist read the name aloud, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, as if it didn't change the air in the room, as if it didn't turn my thoughts into something sharp and dangerous. I felt something crack inside me, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet break, like a bone under pressure that finally gives way. I asked to speak to the doctor. He came on the line, calm and professional. He explained that concerns had been raised about compliance and risk, that it was believed I might not be taking the medication correctly, that a temporary stop was considered safer until further evaluation. I told him I had never missed a dose. He hesitated. Then he said something that made everything painfully clear. He said the information they received suggested otherwise. I didn't ask who provided that information. I already knew. My hands started to shake, not from age, from understanding. Someone had spoken for me, about me, without me. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, replaying every recent conversation in my head. Every time she watched me swallow my pills, every time she insisted on handling things herself, every time she told me not to worry. I felt foolish, exposed, ashamed. I wanted to believe there was a reason that made sense, that she was confused, that she was trying to protect me from something I didn't see. I tried to build excuses for her the way parents always do for their children. But another thought kept pushing through. Control doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives disguised as concern. I realized then that this wasn't just about medication. This was about deciding what I was allowed to know, what choices I was allowed to make, whether I was still capable of deciding anything at all. That night, my chest felt tight in a way I couldn't ignore. I sat awake, listening to my own breathing, wondering how close I had come to trusting the wrong person with my life. And the most painful part wasn't the fear. It was the slow, sinking realization that the betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been building quietly, with my permission, the entire time. The days that followed felt longer than they should have. Without my medication, time didn't move normally. It dragged, stretched, pressed against my body in unfamiliar ways. I woke up every morning checking my chest first, measuring my breath, counting heartbeats like they were fragile coins I might run out of. She acted normal. That was the worst part. She called me in the evenings, her voice soft, almost cheerful. She asked if I was eating properly, if I was resting, if I felt any different. Each question sounded caring on the surface, but now every word felt calculated, like she already knew the answers. I told her I felt fine, not because I was, but because I needed to see how far this would go. She told me not to worry about the pharmacy, said everything was under control, said doctors sometimes overreact and adjustments were part of aging. She spoke slowly, patiently, the way you speak to someone you've already decided doesn't fully understand anymore. When I asked when my medication would resume, she said, soon. No date, no explanation, just soon. My body started giving me warnings she refused to hear. Dizziness came in waves. My hands trembled when I tried to hold a glass. There were moments when standing up felt like stepping onto a moving floor. I mentioned these things casually, testing her reaction. She dismissed them gently, too gently. Anxiety can feel physical, she said. You're thinking too much. That sentence stayed with me. Because I wasn't thinking too much before, she was. I began noticing patterns I had ignored for months. Appointment reminders stopped coming to my phone. Letters from the clinic arrived already opened. When I asked about a follow-up visit I vaguely remembered, she said it had been postponed. Later, when I pressed again, she said it had already happened. The facts kept shifting, and I kept feeling smaller inside my own life. I wanted to call the doctor again, but fear stopped me. Fear that I would sound confused, fear that my hesitation would be interpreted as proof of what she had already told them. I had seen how easily words could be rearranged into authority. I started writing things down instead. Dates, times, symptoms, what she said, what I felt. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet attempt to hold on to reality, to make sure I wasn't imagining the cracks forming around me. The more I observed, the clearer it became. She was controlling the flow of information, not aggressively, not obviously, but completely. I felt trapped between my failing body and her careful smile. At night, I lay awake wondering what would happen if I collapsed. Who would be called? Who would speak for me? What version of me would be presented to the world if I couldn't speak at all? The thought terrified me more than death, because this wasn't about losing my life. It was about losing my voice before I lost my breath. I began to sense that this situation was moving towards something irreversible, that every day without medication wasn't just dangerous, it was intentional delay. Pressure applied quietly until resistance weakened. She started suggesting changes, a smaller routine, less independence, maybe assisted decisions, maybe formal arrangements for the future. She said it like a kindness, but I heard the message underneath. I was becoming a problem to manage, not a person to respect. And the longer this went on, the more I understood one frightening truth. If I didn't act soon, I wouldn't get a chance to later. Something was closing in around me, not fast enough to panic others, but slow enough to suffocate me silently. And I still didn't know how far she was willing to go. I chose a moment when she least expected resistance. Not during an argument, not during a crisis. I brought it up casually, the way she always did, as if it were just another small detail in a life she had already organized for me. I asked her why my medication was stopped. There was a pause on the line, just a breath too long. Then she laughed softly, like I had asked something naive. She said I was worrying over nothing, said the doctors agreed it was better this way, said I didn't need to exhaust myself with details I wouldn't understand anyway. That's when I felt something inside me harden. I told her I had spoken to the clinic myself. The warmth vanished from her voice. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She shifted. Her tone became firm, efficient, the voice of someone who believes the discussion is already over. She said she had done what was necessary, that she couldn't watch me decline anymore, that someone had to make decisions because I wasn't always thinking clearly. Each sentence landed like a verdict. I told her I had never missed a dose, that I followed instructions exactly, that stopping my medication without my consent was dangerous. She interrupted me. She said I was being dramatic. She reminded me of my age, of my condition, of how much she had already sacrificed to take care of me. She listed everything she did, appointments, paperwork, calls, as if it were a debt I owed with obedience. Then came the line that stripped something essential from me. She implied that without her, I wouldn't manage at all. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't cruel in the obvious way. It was said calmly, confidently, as if it were a simple fact. I felt humiliated. Not because I was weak, but because someone I raised believed my weakness gave her ownership over me. I told her she had no right to make those choices without me. She told me I didn't see the bigger picture. I told her she had crossed a line. She told me lines change when people get old. That sentence echoed long after the call ended. I sat there, my hands trembling, my chest tight, my dignity bruised in a way that no illness had ever managed to bruise it before. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about power, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The next day, she showed up unannounced. She brought groceries, smiled at the neighbors, touched my arm like nothing had happened. But when we were alone, her presence felt heavy, watchful. She spoke about arrangements, about simplifying things, about ensuring there were no confusing decisions in the future. Every suggestion carried the same message: less me, more her. I realized then that confronting her had changed something. She no longer felt the need to pretend, and that was dangerous. I reached a breaking point not because of anger, but because of clarity. I saw what was happening. I saw where it led. And I understood that if I backed down now, this wouldn't stop at medication. This would become my entire life, slowly signed away while I was still breathing. That night, as my heart raced in my chest, I knew something had to change, because the next move wouldn't be hers. It would be mine. The shift didn't come with drama. It came quietly, the way truth often does when it's been waiting for the right moment. The morning after she showed up unannounced, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. These days, every call felt like a threat, another conversation where I would be talked over, softened, redirected. But something told me to pick up. It was a nurse from the clinic. She spoke carefully, like someone stepping onto uncertain ground. She said she hoped she wasn't crossing a line, said she had been thinking about my case since the medication change, said something hadn't been sitting right with her. That sentence alone made my chest tighten. She asked if I had personally requested the changes to my treatment plan. I told her the truth. I told her I hadn't signed anything. I told her I hadn't agreed to stop my medication. I told her I had only found out when I was denied at the pharmacy. There was silence on the other end. Then she said something that shifted the weight in the room. She said the consent form on file didn't match the others. The signature was close, but inconsistent. The dates were correct, but the authorization method was unusual. Everything looked acceptable on the surface, but taken together, it raised questions. She said she was calling me directly because she needed to hear my voice before taking the next step. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. Not as a patient, not as a problem, but as a person whose consent still mattered. She told me she had flagged the file for review and advised me to come in, alone, for a private assessment. No caregiver present, no intermediary, just me. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. My hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't fear. It was relief mixed with anger. I began gathering everything I had quietly recorded, my notes, the dates, the symptoms I had reported and been dismissed, the contradictions, the delays, the decisions made without me. Each page felt like a piece of myself I was reclaiming. That afternoon, I went to the clinic on my own. Walking in without her beside me felt strange, like stepping into public without armor. But it also felt honest. Every step reminded me that I was still capable of choosing where I stood. The assessment was thorough. Questions were asked slowly. Answers were listened to fully. For the first time in a long while, no one rushed me or redirected my words. They tested my memory, my understanding, my ability to consent. I passed. Not perfectly, not impressively, but clearly. Clear enough to dismantle the narrative that had been built around me. The doctor looked at the file again, this time with context. He noticed what had been missed before, how information had been selectively framed, how concern had quietly turned into instruction. The power shifted in that room. Not dramatically, decisively. They reinstated my medication under direct supervision. They changed my contact preferences. They documented that all future decisions required my explicit approval. I felt something loosen in my chest that had nothing to do with medicine. When I walked out, my phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. She asked where I had been. For the first time, I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I didn't justify myself. I simply realized something important. The moment someone else had been willing to question her authority, it lost its grip on me. And she could feel it. Because the control she had relied on was slipping, and she knew it. What she didn't know yet was how much of the truth was about to come into the light. The truth didn't come out in one dramatic moment. It came piece by piece, and each piece hit harder than the last. A week after my clinic visit, I was called back in, this time not for tests, for clarification. The tone was different, serious, controlled. The kind of seriousness that tells you something irreversible has already started moving. They asked me to sit. They told me the review had expanded. What began as a medication concern had turned into a full examination of my medical authorizations over the past year. Not just one change, several. Appointment summaries altered, notes added after visits, decisions framed as mutual when they weren't. A pattern. They explained it carefully, professionally, but I could hear what they weren't saying yet. Someone had been speaking on my behalf, consistently, in ways that benefited them, not me. They asked me if I was aware that my daughter had requested formal recognition as my medical decision-maker months earlier, not through a legal process, through internal recommendations, through concern reports. I wasn't. They showed me the language used, words like confusion, non-compliance, decline. None of them had come from my doctors directly. They had come from her. I felt sick. Not because I was surprised, but because of how methodical it was, how calm, how planned. This wasn't a moment of panic or poor judgment. This was a slow construction, built quietly while I trusted her completely. The doctor told me something else then. He said the medication stop wasn't about safety. It was about leverage. By positioning me as unstable, she could justify taking over decisions. By stopping my medication, she could create symptoms that supported the narrative she had already written. I closed my eyes. That was the moment the betrayal fully landed. Not as emotional pain, but as understanding. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to replace me. The clinic escalated the issue. Documentation was corrected, records were amended, authorities were notified where required. I didn't have to push. I didn't have to beg. The system, once it finally saw clearly, moved faster than I expected. Then came the confrontation. Not at home, not in private. She was called in to explain inconsistencies. She arrived confident, prepared, smiling, until the questions changed, until timelines were laid out, until signatures were compared, until her words from months ago were read back to her, stripped of their emotional cover. I watched her posture shift. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for me. She tried to frame it as concern, as stress, as misunderstanding, but the gaps were too wide now, the intentions too visible, the damage too real. When it was over, she didn't look at me. Not once. And that hurt, but it also confirmed everything. Because people who believe they acted out of love usually want to be seen. The clinic restored my autonomy formally, in writing, with witnesses, with safeguards. The power she thought she had secured dissolved in one room under clear light. As I walked out, my medication safely back in my hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, not revenge, just truth. Heavy, final, unavoidable. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't afraid of what came next, because whatever followed would be built on reality, not control disguised as care. The silence afterward was different, not tense, not heavy with fear, just quiet, the kind that comes after something irreversible has ended. My medication routine returned slowly, carefully monitored. Each pill felt less like treatment and more like proof. Proof that my body still belonged to me. Proof that my choices still carried weight. My chest grew steadier, but it was my mind that felt lighter. The consequences didn't arrive dramatically, they arrived officially. Her access to my medical records was revoked. Her name was removed from every authorization. Future decisions were locked behind my direct consent. What she had built quietly over months was undone in days, not out of punishment, but out of necessity. She didn't fight it. She withdrew. The calls stopped, the messages grew formal, then rare, then absent altogether. The daughter who once spoke for me no longer spoke to me, and I grieved that loss more than I expected. Not the person she became, but the person I believed she was. Healing wasn't immediate. There were nights when I replayed everything, wondering how I missed it, how love blurred into control without me noticing, how easily trust can be used as a tool against you when you're vulnerable. But there was something new alongside the pain: clarity. I learned that independence doesn't disappear with age, it gets tested. I learned that needing help doesn't mean surrendering authority. And I learned that dignity isn't something you give away once. It's something that can be taken slowly, piece by piece, if you're not watching. I rebuilt my routines. I took my own calls. I attended my appointments alone. I asked questions without apologizing for them. I made sure my voice was documented, recorded, acknowledged. People started speaking to me again, not around me. That mattered more than I can explain. As for her, I don't know what she tells herself now. I don't know if she believes she was right or if she ever understood the line she crossed. Some truths don't bring apologies, they bring distance. And I've accepted that. Because peace doesn't always come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from self-respect. I'm 73 years old. I still have limitations. I still have fears. I still have bad days. but I no longer live quietly inside someone else's decisions. And if you're listening to this wondering whether something feels off in your own life, whether help has started to feel like control, don't ignore that feeling. Your voice matters. Your consent matters. Your life matters. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment, because stories like this stay buried unless we speak them out loud. And I'm done being silent.